Hey, what's up? This is Tate from Happy, and you are listening to Rhino Radio.
Welcome to Rhino Radio. My name is Orr, and today, through the magic of the internet, I have the honor of chatting to Tate of Happy. How are you doing?
Hello, I am doing wonderful. It's a Monday, I think. With the pandemic, it's a little hard to keep the days straight, but I'm having a wonderful day so far. How about yourself?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm really excited about some new tunes that are coming out from your camp, so we
Oh,
can
yeah.
talk about that. Finally, some news. I think the last time we heard from you was in 2018 with Cult Classics, and now we got a new album coming out. Is October 30th, Imposter
Yes,
Syndrome.
that is correct. We are very excited.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the last. Was it three singles already? The last one is Liar Liar. We'll talk about that as well. I want to talk about the name, imposter syndrome. It kind of sounds at first to me a bit detached, like, oh, those imposters out there. But then I kind of dived deeper and I realized it's a bit more relevant about depression, anxiety, and social media. Can you tell me more about the story behind it and how you made it more personal?
Absolutely. So, imposter syndrome was actually a phrase that I wasn't very familiar with. I have to give that to my fiance, Katie. So, the backstory for naming the record, we were driving in the car and I was having like a total breakdown about the second album because our first album, you put out music and then people like it. And so you have to make sure that people like it again, which is like so much pressure, you know? And so I was just like, what if they don't like the songs? Like, what if people don't like this as much or whatever? And Katie, my fiance, was like, you're totally having imposter syndrome right now. And I was like, wow, that kind of encompasses the entire meaning of this record for us. And it was a term that I just wasn't very familiar with. So shout out to her for that. And I went back to the guys and we started talking about it. And we realized that basically every song on this album is an experience of imposter syndrome that we've dealt with over the course of being a band, whether that's good or bad. I mean, being in a band can bring you some of the greatest moments of your entire life. Like traveling around, playing shows all across the country and other countries is absolutely amazing. But also it can bring a lot of, just like you were saying a second ago, depression and anxiety and the struggle with trying to balance yourself on social media. And I think that a lot of times artists aren't super open and honest with their fans about that. We are supposed to be super like on all the time. Like everything is great. We're famous. We have a lot of money. Everything's cool. We're on top of the world. And the truth is that it's not always like that. We struggle with things just like our fans do, and we wanted to break the fourth wall about that with this record, especially during the pandemic. There was talk on whether or not we should continue with this release during the pandemic, and we decided that there honestly wouldn't be a better time for this to come out than right now because we are all experiencing the feeling of, oh, we're not doing enough. Is the person next to me doing more? We can't do anything right now. Like, how can I be successful? How can I achieve my goals when everything is so complicated? And that's how it is all the time. The pandemic just added a level to that, and so we wanted to talk about that with our fans.
Yeah, so again, just to clarify the phrase, imposter has some sort of a negative connotation, but are you actually
Right.
saying that we all need to kind of fake it? Not fake it till you make it, that cliche, but kind of we need to be a bit more than just skin deep because of everything around, especially with social media, the need, as you said, to be on. So are you actually saying that we almost need to impersonate someone else?
Um, no, I think it's more the internal battle of that question because that we are constantly trying to figure out. I guess to be an imposter is to um is to feel fraudulent in the things that you're doing. So it's like, anything that you're successful at, you feel like you're not doing it correctly and that everyone around you knows that you are faking it. And it's almost like, and that's why it's called a syndrome because it's not reality. It's like the concept of, I put out a song and I think that no one likes it and that everybody hates me and that they're all talking about secretly how they don't like it. And that's just in my own head. That's not the reality of it. And I think that a lot of people that create art have that same setback to where their own brain is hindering them from realizing their success. And I think that that's what we struggle with. And I've seen a lot of other artists struggle with that. So I don't think that it's necessarily that we're encouraging people to be fake or to be a persona. It's more the our experience with the battle of that. For example, like on social media, you're supposed to be presented interesting all the time, and you want to get more likes than the person that posted right before you, and you want to get more likes than the person that posted right after you. And that can become stressful in my normal relationships outside of the internet, outside of social media, outside of creating music. It's like, how is it, we need validation and affirmation from the internet, and then when you go into your real life, it's like, how can we balance happiness everywhere when social media and gets so wrapped up in it? Does that make sense? I feel like I'm doing kind of a bad job of explaining this.
I bet that a lot of people find it a bit more relatable because we are trying to be somebody else, or at least we have two personas, the
Right.
actual one and the online one, or when you go to work, when you go to school, sometimes you have to be somebody else because you think that that's what they want, or because you
Right.
feel like you have to. So it is more than just me hearing voices that people don't like my music, but
Right.
it's a necessity to create some sort of a two-face, sometimes maybe even to survive either socially or actually to adjust in real life persona.
Right. And it's not always a negative thing, because there are some songs on the album that are extremely positive experiences. Like, we have a song on the record called Dull Boy, for example, and it's just all about playing shows and traveling and meeting fans, and how that makes us feel like the coolest people in the world. So there are definitely benefits to imposter syndrome as well. And the highs of that make the lows more extreme, if that makes sense. So, you go out and you play a show for 1,000 kids and you feel like the coolest person in the world. And then you get back on the bus and you're broke, and you can't, your girlfriend's already asleep and your parents are already asleep and you're 1,000 miles from home. And so you go from like on top of the world to on the bottom of the world so quickly. And that sort of juxtaposition is what we wrote this record about, and being kind of in between those two extremes all of the time.
So I want to throw you back to 2018 when Cult Classics was released. And you already said that reality is not that much different than the past. Yes, we have the pandemic, but I kind of just exaggerated an issue that was already there about how to survive, how to make the best of a situation. But your goal with the previous album was to kind of deliver the sense of nostalgia. So again, putting the pandemic aside, what's so bad about the present or the future? Why are you trying to take us back to the good old days, but still the old days?
I think, well, honestly, with Cult Classic, a lot of that music was written over the course of my life. Like, we kind of put together 10 songs. Some were newer, some were older. We were a very new band when we put out Cult Classic. We had only been a band for about 6 months. So when we were putting together a record, we had to pull some songs from like older places, like older, when I had written them a longer time ago, I guess. And
just
so
pointing out that you are 22, so a long time ago is less than 22 years ago. So nostalgia.
Yes, I
What do
was
you
probably
think
like
about nostalgia?
I Call Shotgun I wrote when I was 14, I believe, 14 or 15. But I was really listening to a lot of that, like early 2000s then, like the 1985 Bowling Pursuit, Stacy's Mom, Fountains of Wayne, just like that sort of like the American Pie movie soundtrack, kind of like that style punk music. So when we put the record together, it sounded like that, and we didn't really do it on purpose. It was just like where our influences had come from. And so when we were feeding around, or like fishing around with the record and having people listen to it, everyone told us this is so nostalgic. So we were like, well, we should go with that then, because if people like the nostalgia, then that's cool. But I don't think we were necessarily aiming to do that. When it was all said and done, that's kind of the way it sounded, and it was cool. We were excited about that. But over the last 2 years, I think that people will find that Imposter Syndrome is not as that much so that sound, that nostalgic sound. I think that there are certainly elements of the record that play to Cult Classic, but I think that we spent the last 2 years trying to figure out who we are as Happy, and not so much this band of nostalgia. We don't want to just be a band of nostalgia, if that makes sense. We want to, it's always good to have that element, but new and modern and fresh. And we really tried to do that on Imposter Syndrome. So we're excited for people to hear the new songs too.
Me too. All the singles are kind of pushing me in the direction of Imposter Syndrome. As we said, October 30th, really excited about that. Just to wrap up on that, and to understand your definition of nostalgia, what is your nostalgic film or show to go to? I want to understand, what do you think nostalgia is?
Oh, of course. Well, first of all, I'm obsessed with horror movies. I've got red rum from The Shining tattooed on my wrist. I've got a butcher knife for Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock. I really love old horror movies, really any of them. My fiance and I right now, actually, she's not very familiar with any of those movies, so we're doing like a countdown to Halloween. We're doing Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Blair Witch Project, Rosemary's Baby, all that good stuff. I'm a huge fan of like H.P. Lovecraft. I really like Lovecraft horror. Cosmic horror is very interesting. Um, as far as like nostalgia to me as an individual, all of that happened before I was born. I was born in 1995. So to say that's nostalgia, that's just me appreciating older culture because I wasn't even alive then. Nostalgia for me, I guess, is more like the 90s, like Winona Ryder. We have a song called Winona Ryder on the first album. The Beetlejuice movies, Edward Scissorhands, that sort of stuff I was really into. I was always kind of into like the darker things. And so Cult Classic was this very like colorful album. And Imposter Syndrome has been able for me to like channel my like darker elements into it. Like the colors are like black and red. And I just really love horror. But my favorite movie of all time, and it actually just celebrated its 20-year anniversary yesterday, is Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that movie, but it's kind of a beautiful bridge between music and journalism. And I went to school for journalism. So those two things to me are like everything I love about the world in one movie. And that's a great movie.
So I got to ask about your love of horror films.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
is it something about just your darker passenger, or is it just kind of escapism, or are you actually Dexter inside?
Right? Well, that's what I'm worried. I'm like, I watch horror movies like all the time. People are going to think that I'm secretly a serial killer. So that's funny that you said that. I think actually it's interesting that you say that because I know we were going to talk a little bit about like anxiety and depression and stuff like that. I've been watching horror movies since I was a little kid. And I think I have to blame that on my grandma on my dad's side. She was showing us horror movies at like way too young of an age. Like we were desensitized from like kindergarten watching, Saw or whatever. But I think that honestly, I have so much social anxiety in my day-to-day life that horror movies are like controlled anxiety. Like I can sit down and I can watch it and I know it's going to make me anxious, but like I'm totally in control. At the end of the day, it's just a movie. And I don't think that I realized that's what I was using horror movies for until way later in life when I went to like therapy and stuff. And it was like, excuse me, I have the hiccups. It was like, I watch a horror movie almost every night. Like, why? Am I a freak? Like, why am I doing this? And my therapist told me that it's the same as like people that like to ride roller coasters all of the time or like adrenaline and that sort of sense, that it's anxiety that that you're in control of. And I think that that's a really interesting point to make because it's something that I didn't realize that I was doing. But I think that's probably where a lot of that comes from, for me at least.
Okay, as long as it's safe to meet you in a venue and we're not going to end up wrapped up in plastic or something.
No, I have it's funny that you say that. I just watched this amazing documentary called In Search of Darkness, and it's all about how they did special effects in horror movies in the 80s. And so no, I'm very much so into special effects. The truth is I can't even get my blood drawn without passing out. So I'm not I'm not into gore in real life. I can't see blood at all. It really freaks me out. I know in the back of my head that that's all special effects and CGI, so I'm good there.
So for the fans that have just joined us, we're talking to Tate of Happy, not a serial killer.
Right,
We're
yeah.
enjoying films, but the band is actually trying to be cheerful. The music is all about uplifting you and not slicing you and dropping you in the
Oh, of
bay.
course. Well, and it's funny. The two other guys in my band, Sean and John, they hate horror movies. They absolutely hate them. So like I'll try to put on when we're on tour, like driving like a 14-hour drive overnight or something. And I just want to listen to a scary podcast and I won't get 10 seconds into it before they're like, turn this off. And I'm like, okay, sorry guys. So they don't like my whole true crime thing. Not so much. So that's funny. They keep me from turning into Dexter, I guess.
Well, Sean and John, thank you very much for keeping
Yeah,
the band out of
right.
prison. Uh, I'm going to try and bring us back to something a bit more serious. September is Mental Health Month, and you just released a new single called Liar Liar that talks about your dealing with depression, even talking about your therapy sessions. Is it some sort of an inner discussion that we need to have? Is it asking for help? Is it easier for you to ask for help now? Kind of give us your tips of how us, especially men, that are kind of stereotyped as difficult to reach out to in this specific month. Give us something that was helpful for you in your darkest
Absolutely.
moments.
So you're very right about therapy has a stigma around it, especially for men for some reason. And I think that it's interesting because, to be totally honest with you, when I started going to therapy when I was 19 years old, and it was actually like mandatory for me because I was at University of South Carolina, and my best friend, who was also my radio show co-host, I did like a college radio station. I lost him to suicide my freshman year of college. And the university made it mandatory for me to attend at least 3 grief sessions for therapy, which, so it was something that I didn't choose to do because I had always felt the same way that you do, or that anybody does, about men going to therapy. I had that same stigma in my own head. And when they made it mandatory, I didn't have a choice. I had to go and do these 3 sessions. And those 3 sessions totally changed my life. And I started going all of the time. And it was like, this, why wasn't I doing this before? Somebody had to force me to do it for me to realize that it was absolutely life changing. And then I ended up going for the next 2 years straight of my life. I ended up changing from grief counseling to just regular counseling. And then I did some LGBT counseling a little bit, just a lot of different things, just to try to figure out who I was. And now that, I'm in a place where I take an antidepressant every day. I take an anti-anxiety every day. I'm not ashamed to admit that. It makes me a normal functioning person, and it makes me happy. Like, I can look back to the person that I was 2 or 3 years ago, and there's just this like dark cloud around that human being. And that has gone away for me now because I went to therapy and because I got on the medication. And everybody's experience is different. And I'm not trying to tell anyone that this is the right way to go, because everybody's mental health is different and you have to kind of figure out that journey for yourself. But I do support therapy, and I support figuring out what works best for you. And that certainly is what worked best for me. And when we wrote Liar Liar, we actually wrote that song closer to the time that we wrote Cult Classic, but we felt that it just didn't fit that album, and that the story that we wanted to tell with Cult Classic, we weren't quite ready, or with Liar Liar, that we weren't quite ready to tell yet. So instead of shoving Liar Liar onto that album, we ended up writing a whole record around that sort of concept instead. And so Liar Liar's been sitting on a shelf for about a year, and we're very excited to have it out now because we feel like this is the perfect time to put it out during a pandemic, during Suicide Awareness or Prevention Month. It just felt like the moment that we've been waiting for this song to make the most impact that it could. And it's probably one of the most honest and vulnerable songs we've ever written, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. Hopefully, somebody that need to
Oh,
hear
of
that
course.
got that, and will be able to reach out, especially men that are still stereotyped as the closed ones, and that talking to people about your mental health is not a manly thing. So hopefully that stigma will change, and we'll be able to reach out and not lose as many friends and family as we've done over the
Absolutely.
last few years. So again, thank you very much for opening up about that.
Oh,
I
of
want to
course.
wrap up our chat on a lighter topic. I want to confront you with a rumor. Okay, the album
Okay.
is not out yet. Imposter Syndrome, as we said, October 30th. Your fans are gushing online on what is actually coming out of that album. And there's a rumor that you have a Lady Gaga inspired song, maybe even a video, and maybe a collaboration. Is your love for Lady Gaga finally getting its place in an album?
That is hilarious. I've never been asked anything like that before, and I am amazed right now. First of all, yeah, I mean, I'm the biggest Lady Gaga fan on the world. I'd be ready to like arm wrestle somebody about that. That's hilarious. I think that Lady Gaga finds her way into almost everything I do in a way. So,
Not
just
just music, every single
right,
thing.
yeah. Well, just in the concept of like, I felt when I was a kid, and or I guess in middle school when Lady Gaga first sort of became this icon, I felt like she was just doing things so much differently than every other artist. It was so absurd and it was wild, and she was demanding attention and just being this absolutely crazy human being. And I always thought that was so cool. I was like, she doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks. And I think that I just kind of took that with me everywhere I go. And but as far as like a direct nod to Lady Gaga, I haven't done that yet, but I am very inspired to do so. So maybe if I can convince Sean and John to do something like that, we'll see. But right now, I still need to get them to like Lady Gaga just in general. But we're on the way there.
So I'm just going to give
great.
you a tiny push. If you get Sean and John to do a Lady Gaga horror film,
Okay,
that's it. We're there.
That's it. Yeah. Then I'll die happy. I don't even need to make anything after that. That's my end goal, is to do a horror Lady Gaga infused video.
We'll wrap up on that note. Tate of Happy, we said the Imposter Syndrome is out October 30th. Is there anything else you want to say to fans and listeners out there before we say goodbye?
Hopefully we'll be able to play a show near you when it is safe. That is first on the fun agenda, but only when it is safe. And thank you so much, Or, for having me. It was so kind and nice to talk to you. I really appreciate your time.
Well, my pleasure again. Thank you very much for talking to me. And hopefully we'll see you soon in the UK with Imposter Syndrome and all the cult classics. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.